In the heart of Makira, beyond towering iron gates and under the watchful eye of armed guards, stood Naim Healing Center, a hospital where only the richest dared to enter. Yet no amount of wealth could restore what had been lost inside room 706. That was where Zuberi had been sleeping for a full circle of seasons. Once the most feared name in Makiran business, his voice once shook boardrooms. But now, he lay quiet, still, no words, no signs of waking. No visitors, until Abeni Kalu arrived. Abeni was young, gentle, a nurse from Idaro, raised on prayers and the belief that clean hands were next to godliness. She worked like someone always being watched, even when no one was looking. So when Dr. Sefu, the hospital's top brain doctor, summoned her to his office, her chest tightened like a drum. "Abeni," he said, voice heavy as stone. "This one is different. Most nurses refuse, but I think you are not most nurses." He gestured to a fat file on his desk. She opened it and froze. Zuberi Tay. Even she knew that name. Everyone did. A tycoon by 33, cold as midnight, feared like thunder. And then, the crash. A late-night drive across the winding Bali River crossing. His sleek gold car lost control. No skid marks, no brake prints. Just silence, and then splash. People called it a miracle he survived it all. Since then, nothing. "I'll do it," Abeni whispered, before her courage could vanish like steam. That night, she climbed the quiet stairs to the hospital's highest floor, a suite locked like a secret. When she opened the door, her breath hitched. This wasn't a hospital room. It was a throne room. Soft amber lights glowed on smooth carved wood. The air smelled of burning sage and crushed lavender. Machines blinked and beeped like night spirits in the corners. And there, at the center, lay Zuberi, still as a mountain shadow. He didn't look like the man from the newspapers. No fire in his jaw. No storm in his brow, just quiet, pale, beautiful, in a way that made her chest ache. Abeni stepped forward, dipped a cloth into the warm basin, and touched his skin. A chill rolled up her spine. She froze. It felt alive, like someone inside. Him still saw, still listened. She shook her head. "Let's get you cleaned up, sir," she whispered. "Even fallen warriors need a bath." That was the start. Each sunrise and sunset, Abeni returned. She bathed him with care, spoke softly, told him stories. She shared her day, laughed about how the other nurses whispered too loudly, how Dr. Kojo always stole her puff-puff from the break room basket. "You know," she murmured one morning while tucking in his blanket, "sometimes I talk just to hear my own voice." Of course there was no answer, but still, she smiled. "Or maybe you're listening." Maybe he was, because that week, something shifted. It started small, a twitch. His finger flinched the moment her hand touched his. She stared, waited, nothing. "Ah," she breathed, heart galloping. Maybe it was nothing. But it wasn't. The next evening, while adjusting his arm, she felt it again. A soft pressure. His fingers, slow and weak, curled around her wrist. She gasped. "Zuberi?" Still silence. But her spirit knew. She dashed down the hall, heart pounding. He moved. She cried to Dr. Sefu. It was real. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "It could be a reflex." "No," Abeni said firmly. "I felt it. It was him," Dr. Sefu sighed. "We'll run the tests. But don't climb the mountain of hope too fast." But she already had. The scans came a week later. Signs of increased brain energy, stronger pulses. Zuberi's mind was flickering, like a candle catching wind. "You hear that?" She asked him later that night. "Your soul is waking up." He didn't reply. But she didn't need him to, because as she dipped the cloth into the warm water once more, his hand moved again, this time gripping her wrist with power. Her eyes went wide. "Zuberi," she breathed. And then he opened his eyes like a door. Creaking after 100 moons, his eyelids parted. Abeni froze. She had spent endless days beside this quiet man, hoping, speaking, washing, but nothing had prepared her for this. His gaze met hers, confused, fragile, human. His lips cracked open. A hoarse whisper crawled out. Where am I? Abeni's knees nearly gave out. He had spoken. He was back. The basin slipped from her hands. Water spilled across the polished floor. She spun around and slammed her palm on the red emergency button. The alarm rang loud, like a drumbeat in war. In seconds, the door burst open. Nurses, guards, Dr. Sefu. What happened? He shouted. Abeni, breathless, eyes wide, could only stammer. He moved. He spoke, and before Abeni could even catch her breath, Zuberi gripped her hand again with trembling certainty, and Dr. Sefu leaned swiftly over the bed, checking vitals, testing reflexes, shining a penlight into Zuberi's eyes. Everything was real, and the old doctor's face shifted from doubt to stunned urgency as he barked, "Get the neurology team now." But in the chaos of blinking machines and shouting voices, Zuberi's gaze found Abeni once more, steady and searching, like she was the only familiar thing in a world suddenly on fire. As doctors flooded the room with questions, "What's your name? Can you hear us? Do you know what year it is?" He barely looked away from her, like her presence tethered him to something solid in a storm he couldn't name. And when she moved closer, breath caught in her chest and whispered, "His name, Zuberi, do you remember anything?" He stared at her with heavy-lidded confusion, silence stretching like a tightrope until, slowly, his hand moved again, reaching for hers with a fragile but familiar grip, one that felt like it had been formed in a dream too deep to name. "Doctor." Sefu noticed and asked gently, "Zuberi, do you know who this is?" But though his lips didn't respond immediately, his eyes never left hers as he murmured, "I don't know. But I feel like I should," and a shiver passed through Abeni, because even if his memory didn't recall her, something deeper, his soul, did. And in the days that followed, everything moved in a blur. Physiotherapy sessions, speech exercises, endless evaluations, and outside the hospital gates, rumors spread like wild grass. Zuberi had awakened. The sleeping lion was back, but he was not the same, quieter, slower, eyes heavy with absence. And though his body improved, his mind churned with emptiness as he struggled to remember anything about the crash. No names, no places. Just flickers and pulses that made his restlessness grow, until one afternoon Dr. Sefu sat beside him and asked once more, "What's the last thing you remember?" And Zuberi, rubbing his temples like they were full of sand and static, finally breathed, "Just a feeling. Something was wrong. I wasn't supposed to be there." And from the corner of the room, Abeni sat still, listening like her life depended on it. And when he added, "I saw headlights. Bright, then black," Dr. Sefu only sighed and said gently, "Sometimes trauma clouds memory. It may come back or it may not." But Abeni wasn't satisfied. Something inside her burned. And that night, long after the halls had gone still, she returned to his file and read it again, not with innocent eyes but with purpose. And what she found made her heart slam. Break failure, yes, but not from where or accident it had been. Tampered with, deliberate, planned, and suddenly everything changed. Someone had wanted him gone, and if they tried once, they could try again, and he had to be told. Because he wasn't just healing, he was walking back into danger. And as days passed, Zuberi's recovery felt nothing short of divine. With each morning he grew stronger, from lying still to sitting upright, to eating with his own hands, to forming full thoughts that strung together like beads on a returning necklace. But his muscles still resisted, stiff from sleep, and the therapist pushed him hard. Yet it was Abeni who truly pulled him forward through every wince, every failed step, every groan of frustration. She stood beside him like a stone pillar. And on one difficult morning, as he gripped the cold metal bars, sweat dripping from his face, muttering, "I can't do this." It was her voice, firm, warm, that said, "Yes, you can, Zuberi. You've come too far." And when he looked into her eyes, he didn't just hear belief, he felt it, and with a breath that trembled like a newborn leaf, he took another step, and she smiled so brightly that he couldn't help but smile back, not for the doctors, not for the cameras, but for himself, a real smile that said, "I'm alive. I'm here. And I know who walked me through the fire." Because Abeni didn't see a broken billionaire or a fallen king, she simply saw Zuberi. And that was why he found himself pulled to her again and again. And one evening, after a long therapy session, she surprised him with a simple invitation. "Come, let's take a walk, the air will help you sleep." And he agreed, though he hadn't expected how free he would feel outside those walls, how the breeze on his skin, the rustling of leaves, the scent of night blossoms in the hospital garden, and the soft gold of the moon above would make him feel human again, not a case, not a coma, but a man. And beside him, holding his arm, walking slowly at his pace, was Abeni. And in that moment, under Makira's sleeping sky, he knew something deeper than memory was beginning to return. At first, Zuberi thought the warmth of her touch was just part of Abeni's duty, a nurse's instinct. But then he began to notice the subtleties, the way her fingers lingered just a heartbeat too long, the way she stole glances at him when she assumed he wasn't watching, the way her breath caught whenever he stepped too close. And he realized she felt it too, whatever it was, that invisible pull that tied them together like wind to leaves. And as they paused near a small stone bench, moonlight tracing soft silver lines across her face, he turned toward her, said her name softly, "Abeni." And before she could respond, he reached for her hand, slow, deliberate, as if claiming something sacred, and she gasped, surprised, her eyes searching his face as he whispered, "I don't remember anything about my old life. But I know this, I trust you." And those 3 words wrapped around her heart like a promise, and she didn't let go. But peace has never been one to stay long, and that night, sleep turned restless for Zuberi, his body tossing beneath sheets, as something sharp clawed its way to the surface of his mind, until suddenly, like a lightning bolt cutting through fog, a memory exploded. Dark road, screaming rain, windshield smeared, his hands clenched on the wheel, thoughts still poisoned by a bitter meeting, the sense that something was wrong, deeply wrong. And then headlights bright, blinding, a black SUV swerving violently into his path, tires spinning, brakes unresponsive, and just before the darkness, a figure, a man standing by the road, not running, not warning, just watching with cold, terrible stillness. And then everything went black. He jolted awake, gasping, drenched in sweat, the memory vivid as fire, too vivid to ignore. And in the morning, Abeni knew instantly. His face was stormed over, his hands clenched like fists of stone. And when she asked what was wrong, he looked into her eyes, fire burning in his voice as he said, "I remembered something." And when she asked, "The crash?" he nodded with gravity that made her heart drop. "It wasn't an accident, Abeni. Someone tampered with the brakes, and I saw a man. He just stood there watching." And her blood ran cold, because now all her fears were alive and walking, no longer whispers but truth. And one terrible question burned above all. Who would do this, and why? For 2 days, Zuberi said almost nothing, just sat near the window watching the world below while his mind looped that dark road, the headlights, the silent man, and it haunted him like a ghost that refused to leave, while Abeni stayed close. Never pushing, just being there, bringing tea, adjusting his chair, reminding him he wasn't alone. And then one quiet night, he turned to her and said with a voice full of weight, "I need to know who did this to me." And she didn't hesitate, only replied, "Then let's find out." And together they began, poring through the old accident file, this time with razor-sharp eyes, and there it was, tucked away in the bland language of official reports. Brake failure not natural, not from where, but from human hands, deliberate. And when she showed him, they sat in silence, the truth heavier than grief, heavier than bone. And Abeni asked, who would do this? But Zuberi didn't speak. His eyes darkened, holding something he wasn't ready to name, so they kept digging, through emails, company records, meeting notes. And finally they found it. A money transfer, large and suspicious. Perfectly polished on paper, but reeking of filth underneath, sent just days before the crash to a known fixer, a criminal named Felix Adepohu, infamous for rigged accidents, false identities, and dirty dealings. And the sender? Nosa Te Zuberi's half-brother. The silence between them cracked like ice, and Zuberi gripped his chair as his jaw tensed and voice dropped. It was him. And Abeni stared, breath caught. Are you sure? And he nodded slowly, like a man facing a truth he'd buried long ago. Nosa. Always bitter, always overshadowed. The one who watched Zuberi inherit their father's empire, while he got nothing but dust and resentment. And now it made sense, all of it. And when Abeni whispered, he tried to kill you, Zuberi replied in a low, fierce whisper. And now I'm going to make sure he answers for it. And from that moment, everything became clear. They wouldn't act in rage or chaos, but with calm, calculated fire, and together, they planned each step with precision, starting with a phone call. Setting a trap one Nosa would never see coming. They told Nosa that Zuberi was recovering and wanted to meet him face to face. No doctors, no guards, just family. And so the trap was laid, unfolding that very night inside the Grand family estate in Aoi, the same mansion where Zuberi had once taken his first steps, now thick with the scent of polished wood, secrets, and betrayal. Nosa waited in the shadowed study, swirling his drink like he'd known this moment was coming. And when Zuberi walked in, he didn't flinch. Instead, he smirked and said, "The ghost rises," as if this reunion was a performance he'd been rehearsing for years. But Zuberi didn't return the smile, only stepped closer and asked with quiet thunder, "Why did you do it, Nosa?" And Nosa's laugh came smooth, bitter, his eyes gleaming with resentment as he replied, "You really have to ask?" And then Abeni stepped out from behind Zuberi, voice trembling but fierce. "You tried to kill your own brother. For what? A place at the table?" And Nosa's face twisted with decades of bitterness as he snapped, "For everything that should have been mine. You were always the golden boy. I was just the leftover." And Zuberi's voice sharpened. "You hired a criminal to murder me." But Nosa only lifted his glass and said coldly, "Guess it didn't work. What a shame." And Abeni's fists clenched, her voice rising. "You don't even regret it." And Nosa leaned back, smirking. "I regret not finishing the job." But before another word could rise, the doors burst open and two plainclothes officers strode in, one flashing a badge and saying, "Nosa Te, you're under arrest for attempted murder." And suddenly the color drained from Nosa's face, as he spun on his brother and hissed, "You set me up." But Zuberi stayed calm, his voice steady. "No, brother. You did this to yourself." And as Nosa screamed, cursed, and fought while the cuffs locked around his wrists, the mansion grew quiet, not with fear, but with peace, the kind that only comes after justice. The shadows that had once clung to the walls now receded, and the house that had once held so much pain now began to breathe again. But though justice had arrived, something still hung between Zuberi and Abeni, something unspoken, delicate. And waiting, she was still his nurse, his friend, the miracle who brought him back. But neither had dared name the bond growing between them until one night, when she walked into the dining room and froze. The table was set with soft candlelight, 2 plates, scattered rose petals, and a silver bucket holding wine chilled just right. And behind the glass wall, Makira's skyline twinkled like stars reborn. And when she whispered, "Zuberi, what is this?" he appeared behind her, hands tucked in his pockets, eyes soft but unwavering. "Dinner. Just us." And as they sat, the silence between them felt heavier than all the chaos they'd survived. And she noticed the way he watched her, not with hunger, not with pride, but with reverence. like someone seeing the very thing he'd been searching for his whole life. And when she teased, "You're quiet. That's rare," he smiled faintly, turning his glass slowly and replying, "I've been thinking," and for once he didn't joke, didn't deflect. Instead, he looked her straight in the eyes and asked, "Do you know how many people walked away when I was in that coma?" And though she said nothing, she didn't have to because they both knew the answer. And he continued, voice breaking, "But you didn't. You came every day when I couldn't move or speak or even blink. You stayed." And her throat burned because to her it had never been sacrifice. But to him it had meant everything, and he reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers as he whispered, "You didn't just keep me alive. You gave me a reason to live." And she smiled, tears welling as he added softly, "I have everything, money, power, but none of it meant anything until you." And with that, the last wall between them crumbled, and he whispered, "I love you," and in that moment, everything changed. Weeks later, with strength in his steps and purpose in his eyes, Zuberi walked into the boardroom not alone but with Abeni beside him, and as the golden sun dipped over Makira's rooftops, he led her to the hospital's rooftop garden and stood still, then whispered, "It's beautiful," to which she replied, "Not as beautiful as you." And then he dropped to one knee, heart open, voice firm, "Will you marry me?" And she gasped, 1,000 memories rushing through her veins. Before answering, "Yes." 1,000 times yes. And the wedding was everything dreams are made of, Abeni in her ivory gown, Zuberi waiting at the altar with eyes full of awe, and when they said their vows, they didn't speak tradition, they spoke truth, and when the officiant declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the cheers roared through the hall, but Abeni heard only his heartbeat, steady and real. Later that night, away from the noise, she whispered, "No more pain." And he replied, "No more hospitals." And she said, "I used to want a peaceful life," to which he answered, "Now I want this life with you." And as he looked deep into her soul, he said, "You are the greatest thing that's ever happened to me." And beneath the soft, endless sky, their new story began, not one built on status or survival, but on choice, because love isn't about timing or riches. It's about staying when leaving is easier. And in the darkest chapter of his life, when the world had walked away, Abeni stayed, and it was love, not power, that saved him, healed him, and gave him back not just his life, but his heart. So, now what would you do if the one who saved you also became your entire world? Do you believe love can truly heal what wealth never could?